Hello, I am Sabrina Pletz, and this is Ethical Leadership in Athletic Training, a presentation on the Unified Theory Project. The purpose of the literature review from our previous EDD 901 was to examine whether consensus in the literature existed that leadership and ethics are vital skills to the practice of athletic training, and if formal education is needed to successfully implement them. So three main themes were found during that literature review: ethics and ethical issues, leadership exists in athletic training and needs formal education, and leadership in the professional practice. A surprise theme emerged: gender struggles for women in athletic training. It was noted that women have more pressure and are treated differently than men are in harder ethical situations, such as returning an athlete to play after a head injury prematurely, versus if a female was to say to the coach or athletic director, no, this person is not cleared to play yet, they would be questioned based on their gender, versus a male, if they would say they are not ready to play, then their diagnosis wouldn't be called into question as much as a female. So that was an interesting finding that through that literature process, and could actually branch off into a whole other research avenue as well. So the conclusions from the first literature review, and trying to summarize that up, it did reflect that leadership and ethical behaviors are necessary for a professional athletic trainer. So it was found that these are things you definitely have to have in this field. And then a consensus, again, in the literature was shown that formal education in the athletic training curriculums need to teach leadership skills and ethical behaviors. So not just in learning on the job training, it needs to be taught within the programs. Research lacked in identifying how, when, and where athletic trainers learn their professional behaviors, and no educational programs were found or stated to be implementing leadership skills and ethical behaviors into their curriculums. Even though several articles stated over and over again, you need to implement and teach leadership skills and ethical behaviors in didactic. One article even said 20 hours of formal training needs to be in there, that it's just as important in the didactic as it is the practicum with the preceptor. Ethics needs to be embedded in not just one class, it needs to be embedded in several, learning over time. But like I said, the research could not identify where or if these were being taught or which skills were needed. So recommendations were further research into athletic training, leadership, and ethics, because it just doesn't exist yet. Specific leadership skills, styles, and ways to implement them into a curriculum, again, they weren't discussed. They need to be examined. We need to figure out which skills, styles are necessary for athletic trainers for our discipline and how to implement them. And then tools to examine if leadership skills and behaviors are producing positive outcomes. How do you measure that? So transitioning into EDD 902 for this particular lit review and project. So a problem exists due to a gap in the literature that does not identify specific leadership skills, styles, and ways to implement them into a teaching model. Why is it important? The justification of the study. Athletic training has been trying to increase research studies with other closely related professions such as occupational therapy, physical therapy, and nursing since its recognition by the AMA in 1990. We are still a young profession compared to the other professions. As previously stated, we know leadership and ethical behaviors are necessary for a practicing athletic trainer, and so a study does need to be conducted to identify what those specific skills are for athletic training, and then how to implement them into the instruction of the curricular programs and the educational program. So athletic training is a rapidly growing profession. We've branched out into not just the traditional setting of the college, high school, and professional arenas. We are now in clinics, hospitals, physicians' offices, PT clinics. We are in the industrial settings, places such as GE, Toyota, athletic trainers are there. We are in the performing arts, such as the ballet, Cirque du Soleil, NASCAR, the military. We are everywhere as a healthcare provider. So we must possess ethical and leadership skills to effectively lead in these areas and practice appropriately. So the EDD 902 literature review. So this literature review addressed research on leadership and ethical behaviors from relevant literature in related disciplines of occupational therapy, physical therapy, and nursing. So these three disciplines were the most closely related to athletic training, in my opinion, and they provided a broader view of leadership and ethics regarding allied health professions that aligned with athletic training. So the conclusion of that leadership review, what I found is they have all, OT, PT, and nursing all have alluded that leadership skills and ethical behaviors are vital to their professions, which I would have assumed that as well. And then occupational therapy found that increased awareness needs to be given to the curricular instruction of ethics, as has been found in athletic training as well. So they're looking back through their programs and saying we need to strengthen teaching our ethical behaviors in the curriculum so that translates out into practice. Nursing's indicated that its formal education of its students in leadership is a top priority. So to making sure they're getting those instructions in leadership skills, because when you go out into when you go into the hospital, doctor's office, the nursing there, in the research articles I was reading, the either positive or negative style of leadership affects everyone under them, the patient outcomes, the workflow. And so teaching these nurses to be proficient leaders will affect organizations in a very strong way. Physical therapy research has shown growing ethical dilemmas due to insurance regulations and conflicts within the disciplines of the Code of Ethics and the Medicare guidelines. And so, where the Code of Ethics is telling the physical therapist, this is how you should treat people, whether they have money, whatever it is, this is how you should abide. And then Medicare and the insurances are coming back and saying, no, we've only approved this person for 2 visits a week for 3 weeks, and that's it. And so there's this conflict. And so there's a correlation between those issues in physical therapy and issues for athletic trainers that we face from coaches and athletes prematurely return an athlete to play. That's similar. A workman's comp physician deciding that, or company deciding they don't want to pay anymore, that, this person's, the PTs are sending in the report, they're getting better. They're not to where they need to be to return to work, but then they're feeling pressure from that, entity to return them faster than what they should be. And so this is how I could relate that to all three and athletic training. They did provide additional resources to continue with the journey of discovering which leadership skills and ethical behaviors are specific to the profession of athletic training, and then how to implement them into a curriculum. Now, a little bit about the intervention plan, which was exciting. So, in my intervention plan, that this happened, invitations were sent out to identified leaders in the profession of athletic training, including educational program directors, there's committees in the National Athletic Trainers Association, leadership committees, political action committees. So invitations were sent out to all of these. So 50 actually responded and showed up at the National Athletic Training Association convention, and this usually happens every summer. Usually it happens every summer. And so that's where most closeness and gathering of athletic trainers is going to be, because that's why it's so hard, because it's not like education, like you work in a district or you're in a big company with everyone. You could be one athletic trainer out at a high school and not even see another, work with another athletic trainer. So at these conventions and symposiums is where that joint closeness and proximity is going to occur. So 50 people are in this room, like a moderate sized ballroom. We've got snacks and water, because those are very important when you're talking about getting people together and comfort. They're scattered around the room, 5 or 6 people to these circular tables. So the room strategy by the change agent, how they designed it, was very intentional. The room setup allowed for that joint closeness of each person on those tables, because it was a circle table, so they sat around each other, which led to affinity, and then of course can lead to joint subjectivity. In athletic training, we already have a culture of joint subjectivity, but then the joint subjectivity was of course increased with whatever subject we were talking about. So we initiated a discussion on Larry Nassar which is the physician charged with numerous counts of sexual assault and sexual abuse. And we read this aloud. The change agents read an article aloud that discussed how a congressional report was produced that said that his actions could have been prevented. And there were athletic trainers in that chain of reporting that could have stopped some of the abuse. And so this is going to be a very emotional discussion, which basically is throwing everybody into a delta phase to basically kind of stir up and get emotions flowing, get thoughts going. And so everybody is going to be people are all going to be talking about, of course, doing the right thing. But through these conversations, and even in some of the ethics classes, the conversations in my ethics classes I teach, human nature and behavior does need to be discussed. If you are, your wife is pregnant and you just bought a house and, you're already struggling and in debt, and then you're feeling pressure to, look the other way, or you're going to lose your job. And hopefully at the end of the day, we all do the right thing. But to think through these processes that as human beings, you're going to still think, well, how am I going to pay my bills? Am I going to lose my house? I know, if am I going to lose my job if I report this or if I go against what the coach said. So these conversations are going to spark, put everyone into more of a delta phase, which is good because of that change. We want them to get them thinking that will lead them into why the instruction of leadership skills and ethical behaviors are so important. So we have these as a strong foundation and backbone going into these situations. So the change agents use instruction. They use cognitive structuring for the tables, so they're around each other, they're thinking how to structure what they want them to do, and then feeding back when they are sharing their thoughts and ideas, such as what are the top leadership skills for each for athletic training and ethical behaviors as well. So through that 2-day process, and so that this is the way it was created. Through the first day, they come, they work together, they get thrown in that Larry Nassar conversation. Then they are asked to write out their top, what they all think that leadership skills and ethical behaviors are needed for athletic training. And then after the evening, they all leave, and then it is compiled and tallied, and the top 20 most common leadership skills and ethical behaviors are listed the next day when they come back. And so when they come back, then they're going to narrow those down of which they think are most important. Can they pick a top 10? And so basically by the end of the session, then there will be hopefully a way to save the top 10 after tallying all of the top leaders in almost like a Delphi study in the room, that this will be the consensus to where you could take that now and do something further with it. The participants were also asked to discuss and write down how these behaviors, leadership skills and behaviors, can be implemented into curricular programs. It is hard that all curricular programs are not cookie cutter. So what works for one might not work for the other. So different suggestions are helpful, and I mean, you could even devise more a further research study, a further capstone to how to implement this for this type program, this for this type program. Spalding University has a 3-2, which means freshman, sophomore, and junior year. You are an undergrad, then your senior year of college, you are actually into your first year of grad school. You will graduate with your bachelor's while you're in the program. In your 5th year, your 2nd year in the program, you then will get your master's degree, and you can set for your boards to become a certified athletic trainer. So each program is different. So that's why the suggestions are very important. So a discussion through the process of the Delta Theory project and the literature review was identified that athletic training shares similar academic and clinical foundations such as occupational therapy, physical therapy, and nursing. And this allowed a broader scope for those references and the knowledge base. And then we talked about that, how the athletic trainers came together in the ways through the tables. So, and then thoughts on the Unified Theory Project. Tharp did a great job highlighting the strength of one's psychosocial systems down to the ones in your house, then your work psychosocial system, your friends, your church. Those are so important. And now when I find myself attending meetings and workshops, I'm trying to identify like what psychosocial organization structure is being held. And so I do find myself now with a different lens thanks to Tharp. Thank you.